All right, friends. I've got John Timpane on the line. John Timpane of Car Radio Dog. How are you, John?
I couldn't be better. Thank you, Johnny.
It's a pleasure to hear your voice. Let me ask you, may I call you Dr. Angelicus?
You can call me anything you want, but a child of God. Many people have called me many things. Dr. Angelicus would be fine.
Let them find out what that's all about later on.
Exactly, yeah.
For the people out there, John Timpane is my cousin, and we go way back since I was born.
In fact, before we were born, we go even further back.
Some of us do. As far as in the art and music field, I lived with John and his family back in the 70s, and John graciously took me on the air at KUCI several times and let me co-host his radio show at University of Southern California, Irvine. And what a time that was.
Yeah, it was tremendous. We had a very tiny little radio station with a very ferociously loyal audience and ferociously small. But the two or three people who listened to us just loved us. And we did all sorts of experimental radio back then. We were sort of NPR before NPR got started, I think. But it's back in the 70s when, radio was still personality-driven, and there was still such a thing as underground radio. You would go on the FM side of things to hear music that the AM would not play, because AM at that time had, basically a monopoly on playing pop.
Right.
And so if you wanted to hear album tracks or tracks by bands that were less popular or bands that were, there was sort of this mystique about what we would now call indie bands,
right,
or local bands, then you would go and you'd find FM stations. And we prided ourselves on being part of that. It was very important. And, of course, today, that's one of the steps in establishing college radio the way it became. It's now very important. The music industry, such as it is, the shrinking music industry, pays a lot of attention these days to college. In fact, Billboard has a separate college tracks list that it runs now, which is a measure of just how influential college radio is. Those are the early days. I loved it. I know you did too. I remember.
I did, and I swore that I was going to be a disc jockey back then, but it took me 30 years.
Yeah, but you're a great one. You're doing it the right way on the web. I love it.
Well, I appreciate that, and it is a lot of fun. And my show I have based on that freeform style, that album oriented rock. Basically what I learned from you and others back then, and I did. And we had going into that studio was so great because you guys had the most eclectic library. And
yes, we did.
I remember that week, Neil Young's Tonight's the Night was fresh off the presses.
Yes.
And we would play tracks from David Bowie. We would play some Neil Young and then some tribal music from Zimbabwe or some other crazy, John says, oh, look at this one. Have you ever heard this tribal band? Well, John, I haven't heard any tribal bands. Let's play it.
I was very heavily into African music in those days. One thing I did play. Yes, I did play. The early anthropological recordings of tribal music from places like Africa or New Guinea, which I always have loved. But also, I played a lot of. You may remember this. I played a lot of Nigerian high life, which was really one of my favorite, and still is one of my favorite. Kinds of music that they're now calling it soca, and it's fabulous, great danceable stuff.
Applaudissez, chama chama yeyo, wana ebonga te, walinga te, toujours meilleur. Yeah,
we had this notion that it was all a continuum. And you could go from, I had 78, old 78s from the 30s that I picked in between some psychedelic Beatles cut and a jazz number, just to so no one out there would really be prepared for what came next.
Sure.
That's the name of the game.
That's what I think. It's exactly the way I look at it. I might play Billie Holiday 1 minute and Ian Hunter the next.
Oh, you've got great taste. I love it. And that's the thing. That's the only thing that made it cohere was the sensibility of the orchestrator, that is the DJ, and
right.
Listening to his subconscious going, the one I want to hear now is, you still get to, a lot of college radio stations still do it like that. I have a local one at the College of New Jersey, which is near my house in southern New Jersey, and they still do this kind of thing. It's almost anything, and I learn a lot by listening to them about what's new and
sure.
and what's cool.
Not only was the first time I into a radio studio with you, the first time I ever entered a recording studio was with you.
Right.
With a little outfit called Joyce's Dogs.
Right.
And I remember going to some place, I don't know where it was. It was north of where you lived, and the room was decked out in egg cartons, and it was a blast. You guys were having fun. I was having fun, and you were recording stuff like Thunderstruck.
Thunderhead, yes,
Thunderhead.
That was a straight ahead rocker about nuclear war.
Yeah.
And see, we did it the way I still think it should be done. We just set up and we rocked live in the studio.
What's that noise? Is it the dawn ahead? Girls and boys, cover your nakedness. Is it the toy of the God's criminal? The fire that boils above your head will scorch your lungs and descend in fiery tongues. The target's bullseye is yourself, so reach across and embrace your enemy. What's that noise? Is it the sun ahead? Girls and boys, cover your nakedness. Is it the soul of a God's criminal?
I still love doing it that way, even though, my new band, the new band I'm in, our Radio Dog, we're doing it the exact opposite. We do it now by email.
Right.
We build up tracks by email, and then we have one guy who holds the verse, so to speak, and then when we have finished all the tracks, we mix them down, and the results are great. Our first album was done largely through the magic of digital recording like that, and it sounds like a band, but I still think that setting up live in the studio and just playing, is still, it's still superior. I still love it. And that track you mentioned, Thunderhead, just has a great sound to it for that reason.
Yeah, it still does. I heard it recently, and it was the first time I'd heard it in 20 years or so, 25 years, and love it. It does have a great sound. And the one thing I remembered about that band back then was it seemed to me that with your flute playing and other pieces, it had a feeling to me of a Steely Dan-ish, Jethro Tull, Gentle Giant kind of and I always thought, man, this band could really go somewhere. My cousin could be a rock star. But you chose other paths.
Yes, I know. Well, what I went into in the end was, I became an English professor for, 17 years. And then for the last 14, I've been a journalist at the Philadelphia Inquirer. But I've always had a side gig with music. I was with a Zydeco band as a bassist for 13 years called, it was pretty well known in Central Jersey called Snapperhead Zydeco, where we did Zydeco music. I used to explain what that was to people by saying, well, it's Louisiana music, it's rock and roll in French, with an accordion.
Right.
And and that would play, in a rub board, and it was great though. You can't have a bad time.
Who let it go? I'm Boogaloo. Big Bob. Who let it go? Boogaloo. That's right. Whoa, that's right. Snap ahead. Let it go.
I never seriously thought, and it's really true, I never seriously thought that I would be a full-time musician. I'm one of these guys who, I was classically trained on the flute, and then I was in a bunch of jazz bands in high school, and you had to learn, and a lot of the time I would be in with people who didn't really read music, especially when I sort of went into some rock, and so you had to learn guitar and piano to sort of show people your ideas. And I think you're right. From the beginning, we had a sort of a Steely Dan thing going. This was the mid-'70s that you're recalling. And they were still touring at the time. And so they were still, the original band with two incredible guitarists. Mm-hmm. Of course, we have one in Richard Lindsay, as you know. Mm-hmm. And you go for a clean, sort of jazz-oriented sound. So on the first out, the bands that we have going right now has several of the same people in it, strangely enough. It's got my brother Kevin. It's got Richard Lindsay, the guitarist. It's got me on all sorts of different things, including I do play a lot of flute. And actually on our new album, I play even more than on the first one, which I'm very excited about. And you're right. We have that kind of – we love pop, because pop is just fun, But we also like stretching it a little bit. We like bringing in jazz. We like bringing in different sort of genres and doing things a little bit that you won't hear on other people's records, So, it's pretty eclectic music, and we have a great time. That keeps the challenge fresh for us. And I think also we just have so many people in the band who write music.
Well, I want to ask you about this. The first album, first Car Radio Dog CD, entitled "Fetch." The music originally I had gotten an advance,
yes,
an advance take on the first track that I had heard was Maylene.
Right.
And I just fell in love with that track instantly, and it's still one of my top favorites on the record. Other ones including Maya.
Yeah.
Did I say that right? And
Maya, sure.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, Maya. That's right.
Oh, Maya.
Yeah.
And Bumper to Bumper Man. Very odd song there, John.
Yes, it is. Well, let me tell you just a little bit about those three tracks.
Yeah.
Maylene is largely written by Kevin, and when he wrote the figure that runs throughout the song, and places the bed for Richard's ridiculous guitar solo, which is just amazing. I mean, the guitar in that, you cannot beat that. You cannot bust that, as they say here in Philadelphia, and it's just amazing. We said, this is just. Can I say sticker on your radio station if I can, or if I can't, you can bleep it out. But we just said this is going to be a straight ahead rocker. We're just going to let it out.
Well, I'm
I'll meet you on the run, maybe. Well, you're running from the gun, maybe. I think you've got time to wait, so baby, that's obscene. And I'll meet you on the run, maybe. What you left behind you, mistakes that come to find you, but that just underlines your need. Well, I bet you think you won, maybe. Well, you know I've just begun, maybe. You say you have had the taste. Well, baby, watch that screen. 'Cause I'll beat you on the run, maybe. Get out of here.
Maya is in a different direction. That is really Steely Dan.
Yeah.
That, you know, and I am proud to admit it. I wrote that. I was sick with hepatitis, and I was just lying in bed, and suddenly I got this notion for this great piano part, and so I sort of started fiddling with it. I said, "This sounds a little bit too much like Steely Dan," but then I thought for a moment. I said, "So what?" So, you know, the voices you hear include Mary, my sister Mary,
Right.
who lives in San Francisco, and she's just got this gorgeous voice.
Yes.
You know, and Kenny Landrum is playing fantastic keyboards on it, and that really makes the sound of the whole piece, and a beautiful bass line by Richard, and I'm playing guitar for once, and of course singing lead, and we just had a great time making that, and that was the first one we talked about, Maylene. That's pretty much live in studio.
Right.
Maya is the opposite. That was, you know, the whole band was never together for that one. We did that pretty much by digital magic. But it sounds pretty great. I really have
Sure.
to say, you know, we have, at one point we have a 7-voice choir on there. And the middle part to me is just great with Mary arching over everybody and singing.
Maya wakes at the break of day, takes a cold shower, she likes it that way. Oh, I wish I were the water flowing down and around and draining away, coming through my soul. aside the veil, tear 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 aside the veil.
Finally, we come to Bumper to Bumper Man. And it's about, a guy living his life in traffic jams. So I did just this morning, as a matter of fact. And now the way we did that is very interesting. That's me 7 times. It's a barbershop septet. Me singing all the bits and playing a sort of a little strummy guitar. And that's all it is until, I don't know, about the 1.5 minute mark. And then this big blasting rock band sound comes in, and the drummer there is Bobby Lewis, who will be the main drummer for our second album, and he's just smashing the it comes out of nowhere because so far this has been sort of pretty much an a cappella 7-part harmony thing, and then this band comes in just screaming, and we just had a great time with it.
Stop all this motion, can't you see? You're as close as you can be to a cardiac catastrophe. Accelerator, brake and clutch. Human hearts take just so much. Human hearts take just so much.
We had one thing I wanted to mention about the album is the person who did the final mix is Don Grossinger, and if anyone recognizes that name, that's because he's the guy who mixed Brian Wilson's "Smile."
Yes.
And Richard, our guitarist and producer, knows Don, and he brought the tapes. He brought the digital files to him, and Don enjoyed doing it. But the only one he had trouble with was Bumper to Bumper Man. He said, "What the heck?" And Richard just said, "Well, Don, you're just going to have to deal." So he made it sound great, though. He really did. He really did. Because it does change sound right in the middle there. When the rock band comes in. So, it's just crashing heavy guitars. But we had a fun time putting that together.
It's the whole CD is a lot of fun, but those are the 3 tracks that I tend to play the most when I play tracks on the air. I enjoy it a lot, but I do. Have you got a few more minutes?
I sure do.
Okay, I got a couple more. I want to know. You sent me some songs this morning. Haven't had a chance to listen to them yet, but maybe you can give us a brief rundown on 1 or 2 of them so I can include them in this.
Yes,
show.
Fabulous. Sure. I sent you 4 tracks from our new album. It won't be out for a while, but we're working on it as we speak. It's going to be called Back to the Bone. Get it? Car Radio Dog, Back to the Bone.
Ruff, ruff.
Ruff, ruff. And the 4 tracks are continue sort of the eclectic business, but I think they're sort of different. I think this is going to be a very different album in a way. The first track is a straight-ahead rocker called Baby I Like Your Show, which is meant to be sort of a heavy metal, straight-ahead rock song. And it describes a woman who has arms like Mark McGuire and legs like Sid Charisse, and it's actually very funny. And I got a chance to sing through a bullhorn. Which, is a lot of fun. And then the next tune is a tune called Before You Go. And I wrote this tune a little bit differently from others. It doesn't have really a verse and chorus. It simply has a single melody. which we run through changes. So it starts with bossa nova, gets a little folky, and then it gets Radiohead. Then it gets sort of a Who. It gets really loud in the middle. Then it comes back to a little Beatles thing, and we sort of go out on a little Beatles thing. So, it's a love song in a way, telling somebody, before you go, I have one request: don't go at all, which is sort of the conceit of the song. And then the third tune is called "The Cult of Cruelty," and that's sort of an R&B flavored anti-gang number, and it definitely has a message, which is, you may join a gang to think that this is how you're expressing yourself and your maleness, but as a matter of fact, it's the opposite, because if you're dead, you're nothing. You're not a man, you're not a woman, you're not anything. Yeah, and then we've got a nice 4-part harmony going, including my daughter Pilar on there, and nice, I think a nice little piano and bass line with Real Temptations drums. We're trying to channel the Funk Brothers, who were the great band with Motown, like James Jamerson on bass and Benny Benson on drums. We're trying to get that feel in there.
On.
And then the final tune, and again, it's all sorts of eclectic things, but
sure. Like
most people, I think we're just more, as a band, we're just more honest about the fact that, every band we ever heard has had an influence on us. And
right.
And the fourth track is Mindfulness, and that is our Steely Dan track. That is, it's about it's sort of a Buddhist exercise where you hold a raisin in your hand and you concentrate on it to understand the universe and to achieve a nothingness of mind, which is also a very aware openness. And that's very Steely Dan-y. It's got a great sort of, piano Steely Dan chord progression going, and the middle, where the flute takes a pretty wild solo, is as we say, total Steely all the time. So so we're hoping people have as much fun with this as we're having doing it. If anything, I think we're having even more fun than we did with the first album. I mean, Kevin's getting very involved. I'm very excited that the first 3 tracks on the forthcoming album are all by Kevin, and some of his very best work. And he even sings the opening track. So, and that's what I like. Nice. I like I have been singing most of the tracks, but I would like to pass the vocals around this time. So I think we'll have a few different lead singers, and that ought to be. I'm very excited by that.
Well, John Timpane, let me tell you what, it's been a pleasure chatting with you.
I love you, cousin.
I love you too.
All right.
I'd love to see you guys come down someday and do some music down here. That would be awesome.
That would be totally awesome. That would be a road trip to remember, and I would love to do that very, very soon.
All righty.
All right, Johnny.
And I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for everything.
Rock on. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, buddy.
Hi, this is Male Dance Vocals, and now we're going to do a little piece which is called Play Close Detention. That's right, that's what we're going to do. I'm going to itch my little crotch with my little stick.
What are you trying to show?